He knows when we're alone." That was all she said at first, just a whisper, a tremble, a sentence loaded with fear. And then she stepped inside the clubhouse, clutching her backpack like it was a life preserver in the middle of a storm. Her name was Emily, 11 years old, her eyes wide with something no child should carry, an understanding that danger was watching. She had been followed, she said. A dark blue sedan, peeling paint on the hood, windows black as night. It circled her street. It slowed near her home. It turned the corner just as she did on her way back from the library. Her voice cracked when she explained it. Her mother didn't believe her at first, said it was probably nothing. But the fear in Emily's eyes told a different story. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct, survival. She ran to the only place she thought someone might listen, the Iron Brotherhood, a biker club known more for weekend rides and grilling than neighborhood patrols. But that afternoon, everything changed. Mark was the first to approach her, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with weathered hands and eyes that had seen enough to recognize real fear. He knew Emily from school events. She had always been polite, reserved, the kind of girl who said thank you twice. Seeing her like this, panicked, breathless, hit something deep. Mark knelt down, spoke softly, and listened. The other bikers slowly gathered around. Their usual Saturday conversations faded into silence. Emily explained it all. Her mother, Karen, worked back-to-back shifts at the diner on weekends. Emily often came home alone. The car would drive by slowly, its engine barely a hum. Yesterday, it passed 3 times. Today, she saw it again. Always the same, always watching. Her voice didn't shake as much when she described the details. It was the kind of clarity that comes from repetition, from living the same fear over and over. Mark exchanged glances with Jake, his closest friend in the club. This wasn't a kid's imagination. Peeling paint, tinted windows. That kind of detail sticks when it's real.
Mark placed a steady hand on Emily's shoulder and told her she did the right thing by coming. Within minutes, engines started up. 6 bikers, riding in pairs, fanned out across the neighborhood. Mark stayed with Emily at the clubhouse while the others looked. She sat stiffly on the old leather couch, still holding her backpack like a shield. 20 minutes later, the bikers returned with no sight of the car. But they did find Dolores watering her roses just a few blocks from Emily's house. Dolores was the kind of woman who always knew something before the rest of the neighborhood did. She leaned in close to Jake, eyes narrowed with the weight of information. She had seen it too, just 20 minutes earlier. That same car, that same slow crawl. She said it felt like watching a predator stalk its prey, and she wasn't one to exaggerate. That's when something shifted. What Emily described wasn't isolated, it wasn't imagined, and it wasn't harmless. It was real. The kind of real that slips through the cracks until someone is brave enough to speak up. And Emily had been brave, maybe braver than most adults would be. But this wasn't just her story. It was the story of hundreds of families like hers. Because according to FBI data, more than half of all home burglaries in the United States target private residences. And among those, homes led by single mothers are often the most vulnerable. Karen and Emily weren't alone in this fear. They were just the first to say it out loud. And in doing so, they set something powerful into motion. While Emily stayed at the clubhouse under the watchful care of the Iron Brotherhood, Mark made a call to someone he trusted, Officer Ryan. They'd known each other since high school, and even though life had taken them down different roads, the respect between them remained. Ryan met Mark at a quiet coffee shop just a few blocks away. They sat in the corner booth, away from curious ears. Ryan stirred his coffee slowly, like he was measuring every word before speaking. Mark didn't have to ask twice. Ryan leaned in and said, "We've had other reports, 6 families over the past month, all describing the same thing, same kind of car, same slow drive-bys, always in the early evenings, always disappearing before patrols arrived."
Ryan's voice dropped lower. 2 of those families were later robbed. No signs of forced entry, no alarms tripped, but valuables gone, personal belongings ransacked. And in both cases,
Those families had reported that car days before. Ryan believed whoever was behind it wasn't just watching. He was studying, planning, learning the rhythms of these homes, looking for vulnerabilities. Mark felt his jaw tighten. He asked which families had been hit. Ryan gave him 2 names, and when Mark brought that information back to the clubhouse, Emily nodded without hesitation. She knew both families. The Hendersons lived 2 streets over. Mr. Henderson had left 6 months earlier. Mrs. Henderson worked overnight shifts at the hospital. The other was Mrs. Carter. Her husband traveled often for work, gone for weeks at a time. She once told Emily's mom that she felt like a guest in her own home. Big house, empty rooms, and too much silence. Mark didn't speak for a long moment. Then he asked Emily, "Does your mom work most nights?" Emily looked down and nodded. He asked again, "And your dad?" She answered quietly, "He left last year." Emily's voice didn't shake this time. It was steady, almost too steady, like she had made peace with the idea that her family no longer fit the definition people were used to. "We're targets," she said. "That's what he's looking for. Houses where we're alone." And just like that, the pieces began to connect. This wasn't random. This was calculated. And this girl, standing barely 5 feet tall, had just named the pattern that no one else had dared to say out loud. In the days that followed, tension in the neighborhood grew thick like fog. People started whispering in grocery store aisles, at gas stations, over back fences. But the whispers weren't just about the car anymore. They were about someone inside the community, someone familiar, someone they thought they could trust. Mark first heard it from Jake, who had stopped by the local gas station and overheard 2 women talking in hushed tones. They were saying it might be Larry. Larry, who had been with the Iron Brotherhood for nearly 4 years, always the first to show up, the last to leave, quiet, reliable. Lately, though, he'd been different, distant. He skipped meetings, drove around at odd hours, sat in his truck for long stretches, just staring out the window.
Then came the story from Mrs. Dawson, a retired school teacher who lived 2 streets over. She told Dolores, and Dolores, of course, told everyone else. "Tuesday night," she said, "I saw him parked under the oak tree on Maple, just sitting there, engine off. When I turned on my porch light, he drove away fast. The clubhouse grew colder each time Larry walked in. He would sit alone, drink his beer, and leave without saying much. The conversation stopped when he was around. The suspicion wasn't spoken openly, but it was thick enough to taste." Jake pulled Mark aside that evening. "We need to talk about this," he said. "Half the neighborhood thinks Larry is the guy. If we don't do something, someone's going to get hurt." Mark shook his head. "Larry's not a thief. I know that. You know that. But truth doesn't matter when people are scared. Perception becomes reality, and reality becomes dangerous." Jake ran a hand through his thinning hair. "We've got 2 problems now," he said. "The first is the man in the dark blue car. The second is our community tearing itself apart trying to guess who it is. We need a plan, a real one, something that gives us answers before suspicion burns everything down." And that's when the idea formed. It was bold, risky, maybe even reckless, but it was something. They would ask Karen and Emily to stay at the clubhouse for a few nights, make it clear to anyone watching that the house was empty. Meanwhile, Mark and Jake would stay inside. No lights, no movement, just silence. A trap designed to look like an opportunity. And if the man behind all this was still watching, they hoped he would take the bait. The plan came together faster than expected. Karen didn't need much convincing. She had been holding the weight of fear alone for too long, trying to stay strong for Emily, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. When Mark explained what they were thinking, she looked down and quietly admitted, "Emily's been too scared to sleep. Last night she checked every lock in the house 5 times. Then she asked me if we could move.
She's only 11 and she wants to leave the only home she's ever known because she doesn't feel safe. That was enough. Karen agreed. She packed a small overnight bag for both of them, while Emily carefully selected the things that made her feel normal. Her favorite book, pajamas with faded stars on them, a stuffed rabbit she claimed she had outgrown but still held when no one was watching. The Iron Brotherhood had already prepared a small guest room at the clubhouse. Clean sheets, extra blankets, a nightlight left on in the corner. Emily seemed to breathe a little easier, surrounded by the low rumble of motorcycles and the quiet presence of men who promised to keep her safe. That night, Mark and Jake waited in the darkened living room of Karen's house. They sat in silence, watching shadows stretch across the floor as the hours crept by. The refrigerator hummed. Pipes clicked behind the walls. Every creak, every sound outside became a maybe. Maybe that was him. Maybe he's here. But nothing happened. No car, no knock, no sign of anything. Just the long, slow silence that presses on your chest like something heavy. By morning, Jake was pacing the kitchen, second-guessing everything. Maybe we spooked him, he said. Maybe someone tipped him off. Or maybe... He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence, but the unspoken words hung there. Maybe it was Larry, and Larry already knew. Back at the clubhouse, Larry had been quiet. He spent most of the evening sitting on the back patio, talking with Karen. Mark had seen them from a distance, two people with tired eyes and broken stories, finding comfort in a few shared words. When he asked Karen about it later, she gave a small smile. "He's hurting too," she said. "His engagement ended a few months ago. She left him for someone else, and now he drives around at night because he can't sleep, can't stand the silence of that apartment they used to share." That explained a lot, but it didn't explain who was out there watching homes like hers. And if it wasn't Larry, then they were still running out of time. The next night they tried again. Same setup, same silence, but something felt different.
Heavier. Mark couldn't shake it. Years of instinct told him that tonight might be the one. Jake felt it too. He didn't say much, just checked his phone one last time and moved his chair closer to the kitchen. If the man was out there and he had been watching, he'd see the house empty for 2 nights. He'd think the pattern was real, and he might finally make his move. The first clue was the car, the sound of the engine cutting off down the block, not right in front, but close. Then the footsteps, light, careful, moving through the side yard, keeping low, staying out of sight. Mark leaned forward, heart pounding, slow and heavy. A figure appeared at the kitchen window, thin, agile, confident, not a first-timer. The man pulled something from his pocket, a thin tool, slipped it into the window frame and worked with practiced ease. The window slid open. The man paused, listening, then pulled himself through in one smooth motion. His feet hit the kitchen floor with barely a sound. Mark counted slowly in his head. 1, 2, 3. Then he flicked on the flashlight and aimed it straight at the man's face. The intruder froze. A young man, couldn't have been more than 22, dark hoodie, backpack, thin frame. For a moment, everything stopped. Then he bolted toward the same window. But Jake was already there, blocking the way. The man spun, looking for another exit. Mark stepped forward, calm but firm. "Don't make this worse," he said. "It's over." The young man stopped, shoulders sagged, hands shaking. "I didn't take anything," he said. "I just got here." "Sit down," Jake told him, pointing to a chair at the kitchen table. "Police are on their way." That was a bluff. Mark hadn't made the call yet, but the man didn't know that. He sat down slowly, eyes darting, calculating. Mark studied him. Acne scars on his cheeks, nervous hands. This wasn't just a break-in, it was a setup. Someone had told him the house would be empty. Mark asked,
How did you know no one would be home tonight?" The man stayed quiet. Jake crossed his arms. "Come on, son."
You didn't pick this house by accident. Who told you? The man looked up, eyes filled with fear and calculation. I want a deal, he said. I tell you everything, but I want it on record that I cooperated. Mark didn't flinch, because he already knew. This kid wasn't acting alone. Officer Ryan arrived within minutes. As his headlights swept across the living room walls, the young man at the table, Otis, lowered his eyes, his earlier defiance already beginning to crack. Mark let the officer inside and stepped back as Ryan turned on his body cam and began recording. Otis sat hunched over the kitchen table, fingers fidgeting, his voice barely above a whisper. He spoke fast, like he wanted to get it all out before he lost his nerve. "His name is Ethan Martinez," he said. "He's the one who told me which houses to hit, when people were gone, what to take, which windows stayed unlocked. He knew everything. Ethan lives in the neighborhood. He's been living with his aunt for the past year since dropping out of college, and his aunt talks all the time. She knows who's getting divorced, who got laid off, who's out of town. Ethan just listens, then he uses it." Mark felt something cold settle in his chest. Ethan, Dolores' nephew, the same Ethan who had waved at Mark from her front yard last weekend, the same Ethan who had borrowed her car, the dark blue sedan with the peeling paint, for errands, the same car that had circled Emily's house. Otis went on. Sometimes Ethan would drive past the houses first, just to make sure nobody was home. He'd use her car, the one she never drove anymore, said it made him feel invisible. He'd text Otis when the coast was clear, tell him which homes were ripe. He even warned him when people were patrolling or when the cops were out, and he thought it was funny, said everyone was so busy blaming that biker guy, Larry, that no one would ever suspect him. Ryan gave Mark a look. Within half an hour, 2 more patrol cars rolled up to Dolores' house. Mark and Jake followed on foot. They stood at the curb as officers knocked on the front door. Dolores answered in her bathrobe, her eyes confused and then horrified when they asked for Ethan.
She called his name, but there was no answer. One officer moved to the back door just as Ethan tried to slip out. He didn't get far. They brought him out in handcuffs, his face pale, his jaw clenched like he still thought this might somehow be a misunderstanding. Dolores stood on the porch, a hand to her mouth, watching in disbelief. When she finally met Mark's eyes, tears welled up. "I didn't know," she said. "All those things I said. I was just talking. I didn't know he was using it, I swear." And Mark believed her. She had been careless, maybe, too willing to share too much, but she wasn't cruel. She wasn't part of the plan. Her words had been twisted, repurposed by someone she trusted, by family, and that betrayal, Mark thought, cuts deeper than anything a stranger could ever do. By morning, the news had spread. Neighbors were relieved, yes, but also shaken, because the danger hadn't come from the shadows. It had come from within, from someone who knew their routines, knew when they were alone, knew their fears. Karen and Emily returned home that afternoon. The sun was bright, but Emily clung to her mother as they stepped through the front door. And then, without warning, she cried, not out of fear, but release. All the tension, all the worry, all the nights pretending she was brave, it poured out at once. Karen knelt down, held her daughter close, whispered that it was over, that they were safe now. Larry showed up just as they were unpacking. He brought donuts and coffee, and Emily ran to him without hesitation. She hugged him tight, and for the first time in weeks, Larry smiled without sadness behind it. Over the past few nights, while Mark and Jake had been keeping watch, Larry had become her steady hand. He played cards with her, listened when she talked about school, and never once made her feel like a burden. "Thank you," Karen told him, her hand gently touching his arm, "for everything, for being here, for understanding." There was something between them. Something fragile but real. They had both lost something. Both carried wounds they hadn't fully spoken aloud. But maybe, together, they could begin to heal.
In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed in small but important ways. People were more careful with what they shared, more thoughtful. Dolores still sat on her porch, but her voice was softer now, her words more measured. Ethan faced serious charges, and her sadness never quite left her eyes. The Iron Brotherhood, once seen as outsiders, became something else entirely, a line of defense, a source of comfort. Emily visited the clubhouse on Saturdays, often bringing cookies and stories about her week. The men, rough around the edges as they were, listened like uncles who had found a niece they didn't know they needed. And Mark, watching from the corner of the room, knew that something remarkable had happened. Not just a crime stopped, but a community repaired, a trust rebuilt, and a little girl who had the courage to speak up had become the heart of it all. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say you're scared, and sometimes the right people will hear you. Would you have trusted them, like Emily did? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the next act of courage could begin with just one voice, maybe yours.